115 men, women, and children vanished without a trace. An entire colony gone, their homes dismantled, their boats missing, and a single mysterious word carved into wood. Croatoan. When Governor John White finally returned to Roanoke Island in 1590, he found silence where his family and friends once lived. No bodies, no signs of battle, only that cryptic clue and the gnawing question of what happened here. This is Black Box Investigation. Before I begin, subscribe and don't miss what's next. My name is Walter Graves, investigative journalist with Black Box. I've spent years digging into history's coldest cases. But Roanoke, this one feels personal. As a kid, I was haunted by the tale of the Lost Colony, the idea that you could sail across the ocean to start a new life, only for everything to disappear. Now, as an adult, I'm determined to find answers. Today, I invite you to join me as I sift through evidence and theories, old and new. Together, we'll explore 5 dark theories about what happened to the Roanoke colony after they vanished. So, pull up a chair, dim the lights if you dare, and let's open the black box of this centuries-old mystery. Historical context. The stage is set first. Let's set the stage. The year is 1587. About 115 English settlers, including women and children, establish a colony on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. They're led by Governor John White. Among them are White's own daughter Eleanor and his infant granddaughter Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. This isn't England's first attempt at Roanoke. An earlier all-male military outpost in 1585 failed after clashes with local tribes and dwindling supplies. But this 1587 group hopes for a fresh start. They patch up relations with one friendly tribe and build a life on the island, awaiting resupply from England. John White sails back to England for more provisions, but fate intervenes. War with Spain breaks out. The Spanish Armada and the ensuing conflict keep every English ship occupied. White can't get a ship to return to Roanoke for 3 long years. Imagine his anxiety. His family and over 100 colonists are stranded, and he's powerless to help. Finally, in August 1590, White secures passage and rushes back across the Atlantic. He arrives to a nightmare. The Roanoke settlement he left behind is deserted. Houses and fortifications have been carefully taken apart, not destroyed by an enemy. It looks as if the colonists calmly packed up and left. But to where? White searches for clues and finds 2. The letters CRO etched into a tree, and the full word Croatoan carved on a fort post. This sparks a flash of hope. Before leaving in 1587, White had told the colonists if they ever had to relocate, they should carve their destination's name. And if danger forced them to flee, they should also carve a Maltese cross as a distress signal. White sees no cross, just Croatoan. He interprets this to mean they moved to Croatoan Island, home of their allied Croatoan people. Today we call it Hatteras Island, about 50 miles south. White desperately wants to sail to Croatoan Island and find his people, but a brutal storm blows in, damaging his ship. The crew, low on food and eager to head home, refuses to continue the search. Heartbroken, John White is forced to turn back to England, never knowing the fate of his daughter, granddaughter, and the others. The Lost Colony's story slips into legend, leaving us with that haunting question: what became of them? Over the years, investigators, historians, and locals have chased every lead. Some clues and rumors emerged. Reports of Europeans seen among native tribes, strange carvings, even mysterious stones with messages. But no definitive answer. Instead, we have a handful of compelling theories. Let's examine 5 of the darkest possibilities that researchers have proposed. Each theory offers a glimpse of what might have happened after the Roanoke colonists vanished from their island camp. Theory 1, they assimilated with the Croatoan tribe. The first theory is perhaps the most hopeful, though it comes with its own dark twists. It goes like this. The colonists didn't die at Roanoke at all. Instead, they packed up and relocated to live with friendly Native Americans, integrating into their society. Remember Croatoan carved on the post? The Croatoan, or Hatteras tribe, had been on good terms with the English. In fact, a Croatoan man named Manteo had been a key ally and guide since the first expedition. He even traveled to England and back, and was baptized and named Lord of Roanoke by the English. The Roanoke settlers considered the Croatoan their friends, so when food grew scarce or they felt unsafe on Roanoke Island, it would make sense to seek refuge with their neighbors on Croatoan Island. Evidence? There's no written record from the colonists themselves, but later accounts give tantalizing hints. Decades after the disappearance, English explorers in Virginia reported encountering Native Americans with European features, gray eyes, fair hair, and some who spoke broken English or had inherited European-style objects. In the early 1700s, a colonist named John Lawson visited Hatteras Island, the former Croatoan island. He wrote that the Hatteras people claimed some of their ancestors were white. They even showed Lawson they had English surnames among them, passed down through families. Could these have been the descendants of Roanoke colonists? Lawson was intrigued. He noted they lived in villages and even built two-story houses as the English did, something native people hadn't done before. The Hatteras storytellers said their forefathers could speak out of a book, implying they had learned reading from the English. Fast forward to recent years, the plot thickens. Archaeologists on Hatteras Island have unearthed late 16th century English artifacts buried in native settlements. Parts of swords and guns, copper rings, pottery. One dig uncovered buckets of hammer scales, the tiny iron scraps from a blacksmith's forge at a Croatoan village site. Natives didn't do blacksmithing. That was an English skill. It seems English colonists were living and working there alongside the Croatoan. According to researchers like Scott Dawson of the Croatoan Archaeological Society, this is hard evidence that at least some lost colony survivors joined the Hatteras tribe and lived for years among them. But if that's true, why didn't John White find them or hear of them in 1590? Possibly because by the time he arrived, they had already moved on from Roanoke, and White's aborted search meant the connection was never made. The colonists might have split into smaller groups for better chances. One group could have gone to Croatoan Island as indicated. Another group perhaps ventured inland, 50 miles into the Main, as Governor White's own notes suggested they planned. If multiple factions of colonists scattered, it complicates the trail. Interestingly, one Native American group today, the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, has long claimed to be descended from the Roanoke colonists, mixed with local tribes. The Lumbee have surnames that match some on John White's 1587 roster. Names like Dare, Berry, and Hyatt appear in both the Colony and Lumbee records. Early European settlers who met the Lumbee in the 1700s were astonished to find some members with light eyes, speaking English. Is it proof positive? Not quite. The Lumbee origins are still debated, but it's a fascinating piece of the puzzle. Assimilation with the Croatoan or other tribes is the least violent theory, but it has a bittersweet edge. It means the Roanoke colonists survived, only to lose their identity over time, absorbed into another culture. Their English way of life, their colony of Raleigh, Virginia, essentially vanished as they became part of native society. Perhaps they preserved stories of their journey for a generation or two, but eventually their Englishness faded. If this happened, the Lost Colony didn't die. It became something new, hidden in plain sight among America's indigenous peoples. It's almost poetic, but it raises another question. If they survived that way, why did no one return to tell the tale? Maybe because by then they had new families, new allegiances, or simply no means to sail back or contact England. We may never know for sure, but of all theories, this one paints the colonists not as victims, but as survivors who adapted. Still, the mystery remains. Not a single definitive record of them was ever found. Theory 2. Massacre, the Wrath of the Powhatan. Our second theory takes a much darker turn. It suggests the lost colony met a bloody end at the hands of a hostile Native American chief, Wahunsenakau, better known as Chief Powhatan, ruler of a powerful federation of tribes in coastal Virginia. This is the same Powhatan whose daughter was Pocahontas, to situate him in history. According to accounts recorded a couple of decades later, Powhatan claimed he wiped out the Roanoke colonists. Here's the story. In 1607, the English established Jamestown in Virginia. Captain John Smith of Jamestown, yes, the one Pocahontas supposedly saved, heard rumors about pale-skinned people living among tribes to the south. Smith actually met Powhatan face-to-face during his captivity that year. In one report, which became controversial later, John Smith wrote that Powhatan boasted of having orchestrated a slaughter of the Roanoke colonists. The chief allegedly said the English at Roanoke had taken refuge with a tribe in his territory, possibly on the Chesapeake Bay or along the Chowan River. That tribe refused to submit to Powhatan's rule. Fearing these foreigners might help his enemies, Powhatan decided to eliminate them. He described attacking the colonists and their native allies, killing most, and taking some of their belongings. Powhatan even presented John Smith with a few possessions he said were taken from Roanoke, a musket barrel, a brass mortar and pestle, as proof of his grim deed. When word of this reached England in 1609, it caused an uproar. King James and his council believed Powhatan was confessing to the lost colony's fate. Another source, William Strachey, an English writer in Jamestown around 1610, backed up the massacre story with additional details. Strachey wrote that the colonists had indeed lived peacefully for 20 years with a certain friendly tribe beyond Powhatan's domain. But shortly before the Jamestown settlers arrived, Powhatan's priests warned him of a prophecy, a threat to his rule from a people in that area. Powhatan, supposedly acting on this prophecy, massacred the colonists in cold blood to prevent future rebellion. Strachey even recounted that 7 colonists survived the attack, 4 men, 2 boys, and a young woman who fled inland to an allied chieftain and lived on as captives or slaves. It's a dramatic tale of treachery and tragedy. How much of it is true? That's been debated for centuries. There were no bodies or archaeological evidence at Roanoke Island of a mass killing, and Powhatan might have had reasons to lie or exaggerate, perhaps to intimidate the Jamestown English. Don't cross me, or you'll end up like those other colonists. Also, John Smith's writings varied. In some versions of his journals, he doesn't mention this confession at all, likely because parts were edited or suppressed by officials to avoid scaring new Jamestown settlers. The Virginia Company didn't want a horror story circulating. Strachey's account came later and is second-hand. He wasn't an eyewitness. He heard it from natives and Powhatan's relatives. Modern historians are split. Some think Powhatan's story might actually refer to a different group. Remember the 15 English soldiers left on Roanoke by a previous expedition in 1586? There's speculation that maybe those men, or some of the lost colony who went inland, were attacked, and Powhatan's claim got muddled or exaggerated. In any case, the idea of a Powhatan massacre was the first major theory to emerge. Even back in 1608, it was the lead investigators were following. Jamestown's government believed it enough that they dispatched search parties and contemplated punitive action. They never found the supposed massacre site, though. If true, it's a grim ending. The colonists survived 3 years alone, only to be slaughtered on the cusp of rescue. Men, women, children, killed due to tribal power politics and prophecy. There's a chilling footnote here. One story claims that Powhatan, perhaps feeling remorse or fearing retribution, later ordered the execution of any Roanoke survivors that other tribes might be sheltering, specifically to eliminate witnesses. But again, no proof beyond hearsay. In my investigation, I've seen evidence both for and against this theory. On one hand, native oral histories in the region do speak of white people who were killed. On the other, no archaeological massacre site with European artifacts or bones has ever been identified. Could it be that a massacre happened but on a small scale, or that only some colonists were killed and others assimilated afterward? We can't rule it out. It's possible two or more theories are not mutually exclusive. Real history is messy. There might have been a split fate. Some colonists assimilated peacefully, Theory 1, while others wandered into Powhatan's territory and met a violent end, Theory 2. That layering makes solving Roanoke like solving a puzzle with missing pieces. If you're still listening, you know what to do. Hit like and subscribe to support me and my investigation. Theory 3. Death by disease, hunger, and desperation. Not every mystery needs human villains. Theory 3 posits that the lost colony succumbed to the cruelest forces of nature, disease and starvation. Perhaps no one attacked them at all. Instead, they wasted away due to illness, famine, or internal strife, and any survivors quietly dispersed. When John White left in 1587, the colony was already in a precarious state. They arrived too late in the season to plant substantial crops. Relations with some local tribes, aside from the Croatoan, were sour, limiting trade for food. Now consider this bombshell. Scientists have discovered that from 1587 to 1589, the exact window when the colonists were alone, the region was hit by an extreme drought, the worst in 800 years. Tree ring data from ancient Virginia oaks show a massive drought gripped the area. Imagine the swamps drying up, crops withering, game animals dying or moving away. The colonists, already low on supplies, would have been struggling to grow or find food in a strange land during an unprecedented drought. Hunger can drive people to unthinkable actions. We know that only 20 years later, the Jamestown settlers, 1609 to 1610, went through the starving time and resorted to cannibalism to survive. Could the Roanoke colonists have faced a similar nightmare? There's a theory that as food ran out, some colonists might have turned on each other in desperation. In fact, reports collected later from local tribes mentioned that there had been internal conflict among the Roanoke settlers before they disappeared. Fights, perhaps over food. One tale suggests a few colonists might have even fled Roanoke earlier, seeking food, and never came back. If starvation and disease struck together, it's a deadly combo. New World diseases could have swept through a malnourished population. The colonists had no immunity to local pathogens, and the stress of hunger would lower their resistance further. European accounts talk of a mysterious illness, some speculate plague or a contagious fever, that might cause delirium and paranoia. If such a sickness hit Roanoke, the healthy colonists might have panicked. They might isolate the sick or even abandon them to die to protect the group. The colony could have effectively split into factions. Perhaps some people left the island to escape disease, while others stayed and perished. This scenario would explain the absence of bodies at the site. If the colonists left gradually in small groups, dying off in various places or joining other communities, there'd be no mass grave for archaeologists to find. And any who survived the initial crisis may have integrated with natives, tying back to Theory 1, simply to stay alive, bringing only a few possessions. Over time, any trace of them as Roanoke colonists vanished. One particularly eerie angle on this theory is cannibalism. While there's no direct evidence the Roanoke settlers ate each other, it has been floated as a possibility. If they did, it could leave very little trace. Desperate colonists might consume the dead and destroy the bones by burning or crushing to hide the evidence or even use them as medicine, as was custom for some cures back then. Alternatively, one fringe idea suggests they were preyed upon by cannibalistic tribes from the area. It's important to note there's no solid evidence any local tribes practiced cannibalism on the coast. That gruesome reputation was more associated with some Caribbean or far inland groups, and often exaggerated by Europeans. Nonetheless, fear can run wild in a famine. The Roanokers wouldn't know which neighboring peoples to trust when starving. This theory of famine and disease is dark in a less cinematic way. No big battle, no dramatic betrayal, just a slow, inexorable doom. We can picture it. Crops failing under relentless sun, wells drying up, children crying with hunger, colonists succumbing one by one to dysentery or fever. With leadership crumbling, the survivors decide to abandon camp in a last-ditch effort to find help. They carve Croatoan, maybe indicating their general plan to go toward friendly territory, and set off. But weakened and few, some die en route, some integrate with whoever takes them in. The colony fades from history not in a blaze of glory, but with a whimper. For me, the most convincing part of this theory is the drought evidence. It's a fact. Roanoke's critical years were bone dry. It would be shocking if the colonists didn't face a severe food crisis. That alone could have driven them to relocate. Perhaps they indeed moved to Croatoan Island because of better fishing and oyster beds there, or to the mainland where rivers could provide sustenance. In that sense, this theory can overlap with others. Famine pushed them into the arms of the Croatoan or into the territory of Powhatan, with tragic results. Theory 4. Spanish retribution, a secret attack. The next theory shifts the blame to an entirely different quarter: Spain. Remember, 1587 was smack in the middle of the Anglo-Spanish rivalry. England's Queen Elizabeth I was challenging Spain's dominance in the New World. Roanoke was intended not just as a colony, but as a potential base for English privateers, legal pirates essentially, to raid Spanish ships. To Spain, any English foothold in La Florida, which they considered their domain, was a threat to be eliminated. So Theory 4, the Spanish found out about Roanoke and destroyed the colony in secret. Could that be? We have some intriguing hints. A man named Darby Gland, one of the Roanoke colonists, actually deserted the 1587 expedition while it made a pit stop in the Caribbean. He was Irish and apparently had little loyalty to England. In Puerto Rico, Glanda slipped away and later claimed he told Spanish officials all about the English colony's location. If true, he basically blew Roanoke's cover. The Spanish in Florida, St. Augustine was their northernmost base, certainly had the capability to send a ship up the coast to snoop around. In fact, Spanish archives later revealed that Spain was actively looking for the English colony. Spanish spies in London knew Raleigh's colony was somewhere on Virginia coast. Spanish officials dispatched expeditions to search the Chesapeake and mid-Atlantic coastline in the late 1580s and 1590s. Now, historically, we know the Spanish did destroy foreign colonies when they found them. The French Fort Caroline in Florida was obliterated by the Spanish in 1565, for instance, with great brutality. So, if a Spanish patrol found the tiny Roanoke settlement, what would they do? Most likely attack, burn it, and kill or capture the colonists as prisoners of war or slaves. And they might not broadcast that deed, especially if it was essentially an illegal raid in peacetime. Recall, Spain and England weren't formally at war until mid-1588. However, the Spanish theory has some holes. John White saw no signs of violence at Roanoke, no bodies, no blood, no burned ruins. Instead, he found a palisade neatly intact, even improved, and houses dismantled, not torched. If Spanish soldiers had stormed in, one would expect fire and destruction, or at least bullet holes or cannon shot damage. There was none. Also, when the Spanish later searched in 1600 for the English colony, they were still looking, which suggests they hadn't found it earlier either. If they had wiped it out, they'd presumably know and stop searching. Is it possible the Spanish attacked the colonists after they left Roanoke? For example, if colonists tried to sail up or down the coast? Maybe, though there's no record of Spanish ships capturing any English in that area at that time. One Spanish report did claim some English were living with Chesapeakean natives in Chesapeake Bay around 1600. They suspected those might be the Roanoke survivors. Spain actually feared those lost colonists were still plotting with England to threaten Spanish lands. Let's imagine the scenario, though. A Spanish raiding party surprises the Roanoke colonists. Perhaps they do it stealthily, forcing a surrender rather than a fight, hence no damage to the fort. They could march the colonists off at sword point to their ships, planning to take them to Spanish prisons in the Caribbean. In that case, Roanoke would be empty with no sign of struggle, fitting what White found. But wouldn't at least one captive story have surfaced? England and Spain did prisoner exchanges. We might expect a mention of English women or children being held. None ever came. Given the lack of evidence, most historians view the Spanish attack theory as unlikely, yet it remains a dark possibility. A twist on it is that the colonists, desperate and forgotten by their own country, might have invited rescue by the Spanish. Could they have tried to sail toward Spanish territory seeking help? The Spanish might then rescue them, only to imprison them. It sounds far-fetched, but in dire straits, who knows? Ultimately, the story of Roanoke occurs on the stage of imperial conflict. The colonists were pawns in a larger game between England and Spain. Whether or not a Spanish sword fell on Roanoke, the Anglo-Spanish War sealed the colony's fate indirectly by delaying White's return. If help had arrived in 1588 as planned, maybe the colony would have survived. Instead, by 1590, they were gone. Spain didn't need to fire a shot to be one of the villains in Roanoke's saga. Their mere threat starved the colony of support. Still, as an investigator, I find no smoking gun for a covert Spanish hit job. The timing and evidence just don't line up cleanly. Theory 5. The colonists sailed away, lost at sea. Our fifth and final theory asks, what if the lost colonists didn't vanish on land at all, but rather at sea? Picture this, months turning to years with no relief from England. The colonists realized John White might never come back. Perhaps their situation is deteriorating, maybe due to famine, conflict, or fear of attack. They decide to take matters into their own hands and build a boat to escape. We know the 1,587 colonists had a small ship, a pinnace, left for them by the transport fleet. A pinnace is a light sailing boat, something that could hold maybe a few dozen people for coastal travel, possibly even an ocean crossing if desperate. It wouldn't fit all 115 colonists at once, but they could attempt a voyage in shifts or construct another vessel. In 1563, some stranded French colonists in Florida famously built a crude boat and sailed back to Europe, so the idea isn't completely crazy. Imagine the leaders of Roanoke debating, do we stay and slowly die, or risk a voyage on our own? They might have decided to split the group. Some could remain, maybe the sick or those with small children, and others, perhaps the stronger men and women, would sail out to get help. If they succeeded, they'd return with a rescue. If they failed, well, they were probably doomed anyway. It's a harrowing choice. If such a voyage was attempted, there are a few possibilities. They could try to sail back to England across the Atlantic. That would be extremely perilous in an undercrewed pinnace with limited provisions, but not impossible. They could also try to reach an English fishing fleet up north, around Newfoundland, or make it to the friendly English outpost by then established in Newfoundland. Or they might hug the coast and attempt to reach the English-controlled territory later known as Newfoundland, directly by coastal hopping. Alternatively, they might have aimed for the Caribbean, maybe trying to reach a French or Spanish-held island to surrender in exchange for mercy. Unfortunately, history records no ragtag group of English castaways arriving anywhere. If they sailed into the Atlantic, it's very likely they never made it. Storms, shipwreck, starvation at sea, a host of dangers could have sent them to the bottom of the ocean. That would neatly explain why no trace of the colonists was ever found. They might lie in a shipwreck on the seafloor or scattered on some remote shore far from search efforts. There's another scenario. They used boats not to go to England, but to relocate to a safer area nearby. For instance, they might have sailed up Albemarle Sound or Chesapeake Bay, closer to where Raleigh originally intended them to settle. In fact, that aligns with an earlier plan. The colony was supposed to be in the Chesapeake region, not Roanoke, but they got left at Roanoke due to a pilot's manipulation. Perhaps the colonists themselves later said, "Let's go where we were meant to be, the Chesapeake. Maybe we'll find a better home there." In doing so by boat, they could have ended up in Powhatan's backyard, tying into Theory 2's massacre, or they simply vanished into the bayous of the mainland. English search parties from Jamestown later did scout the Chesapeake and found none of the lost colony, but they heard rumors that a few might have reached a place called Panawiki or Pakrakanik, native towns inland, with 4 Englishmen living there. Jamestown's governor even drew up a map marking where colonists might be held. Perhaps these were those who journeyed by boat and integrated inland. The lost at sea theory might be the saddest of all in some ways. Picture the colonists' last desperate hope. Sails made from canvas sacks, a boat overloaded with frightened people. Virginia Dare crying in her mother's arms as the surf breaks over the hull. Perhaps they look back at Roanoke's shore receding, wondering if they'll ever touch land again. The Atlantic is merciless. If a hurricane caught their tiny craft, it would swallow them whole. There'd be no chronicles, no survivors to tell their tale, just flotsam and silence. It's admittedly speculative. We have no account of an attempted escape voyage. But we do know they had the means, the pinnace, and the absence of that pinnace when White arrived is notable. He did observe that the colony's boats were gone. If those boats weren't at Roanoke or Croatoan, something happened to them. Were they taken by the colonists or stolen by someone else? We lean toward thinking the colonists themselves used them. Closing thoughts, unraveling the threads. After examining all these theories, one thing becomes clear. The fate of the Roanoke colony might not be a single story, but several intertwined. Perhaps some were absorbed peacefully by the Croatoan. Others might have been killed by Powhatan or perished from disease. A few could have tried to sail away and were lost. The truth could be a mosaic of all these fates. What makes Roanoke so haunting and so hard to crack is the lack of concrete evidence. We're dealing with fragments, a carved word, second-hand native stories, a few European objects in the ground. It's like a 400-year-old cold case with almost no forensic trail. Every time a new clue emerges, it raises as many questions as answers. Take the so-called Dare stones, for example. In the late 1930s, people found a series of rocks in the Carolinas and Georgia, with inscriptions claiming to be messages from Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter. The first stone's inscription basically said the colonists left Roanoke, suffered terribly, only 7 alive, it read, bloodshed by savages, and that her husband Ananias and daughter Virginia had died. It begged whoever found it to tell John White. Later stones, now widely believed to be hoaxes, spun a tale of the survivors traveling further inland. While most historians doubt these stones' authenticity, they underscore something. The world wants a story for Roanoke. We crave closure, even to the point of creating myths to fill the void. But in historical investigations, we have to separate legend from fact. My journey into Roanoke's mystery has taken me from the windswept dunes of Hatteras to archives of old letters and maps. I've held a 16th century nail dug up from Site X on the mainland. a nail that might have been forged by a Roanoke colonist's hand. I've walked under ancient live oak trees where the lost colonists may have sought shelter. In those moments, I felt a connection across time, imagining the whispers of English voices in an untamed land. They were real people, fathers, mothers, children. They dreamed of a new life in Virginia. Instead, they became a mystery. Perhaps one day soon, archaeologists will uncover definitive proof, a grave site with European DNA, a colonial signpost in a tribal village, a manifest in Spanish archives detailing English prisoners. Until then, we have these theories and our imagination. What do I believe? If you pressed me, I'd say survival and assimilation seem to be the common thread. I suspect the colonists abandoned Roanoke willingly, seeking a better situation. They likely went to Croatoan Island first, as the carving suggests. From there, some might have journeyed inland along rivers. They almost certainly lived for a while among sympathetic tribes, carving out an existence, perhaps hoping for rescue that never came. And then, history took its course. Politics among tribes, the Powhatan expansion, the drought. All these things could scatter and destroy the fragile remnants of the colony. In the end, the survivors' children and grandchildren were no longer English colonists at all, but members of the communities that took them in. Roanoke, the colony, died, but its people lived on in other forms. It's not a tidy ending, and it doesn't make for a single thrilling narrative, which is why so many fantastical tales, ghosts, curses, even aliens in some pop culture theories have sprouted around Roanoke. The word Croatoan itself became legendary, appearing in eerie stories from Edgar Allan Poe's mysterious deathbed mutterings to the carved cell wall of a vanishing outlaw. The Lost Colony has become a canvas for our fears and curiosities. But behind all the legends are the poignant realities of human lives lost to time. To me, the Roanoke mystery isn't just about how they disappeared. It's about remembering that they existed. They were pioneers in a truly perilous experiment. And whether they were killed, died of hunger, or merged with another society, they deserve to be known and remembered. As I conclude this investigation, I think of John White, sailing away from Roanoke in 1590, tears in his eyes, forced to leave not knowing if his family was dead or alive. He never found them. But perhaps somewhere, Virginia Dare grew into a woman among the Croatoan or another tribe, telling her children about Grandfather White and the home they once had on Roanoke. It's a bittersweet thought, but not impossible. The search for the lost colony continues even now. Archaeologists and historians are still on the case, digging, analyzing, trying to coax secrets from the soil. Every artifact is a voice from the past, echoing the truth we seek. Whatever the answer, the story of Roanoke has lessons to teach about cultural contact, about survival, about how history can hinge on a single word carved in wood. 430-odd years later, we're still captivated. I know I am. This has been Walter Graves, unfolding the mystery of Roanoke Colony here on Black Box Investigation. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the unknown. Together, we've shone a light into one of America's oldest historical black boxes. And remember, the black box doesn't lie. Neither do we. Like, comment, subscribe. Help me bring forgotten stories back to light.